I recently passed a milestone in my life when I realized that I was now old enough to say, this isn't the country I grew up in. And I'll bet you felt that way too. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining me in studio, the Skywatch TV CEO and the newest member of the Skywatch TV team, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hey, good to be here.
The topic today is a brand new book coming out from Defender Publishing, When Once We Were a Nation. 12 chapters, 12 authors, 12 topics, and the brainchild of Tom Horn. Tom, clearly you've thought about this as well. What was it that led to the idea for Once We Were a Nation?
Yeah, you know, the honest truth is it's probably one of the timeliest books we've ever published. We've published it in a rush. Partly because of the nature of the political season that we're in right now, where you've got Donald Trump out there with his big red hat saying we can be great again. Mm-hmm. But and his popularity even, I think, reflects the fact that so many people in our country feel like something is amiss and can't quite put their finger on it, right? You know, President Reagan talking about America as a bright beacon, a city on a hill, right? Something to be aspired to, something that everybody else in the world wanted to become, or they wanted to migrate here and be part of this great American dream. It was a place where you could come if you worked hard, you could get ahead, you could do better, right? It was an opportunity for people around the world. At one time, what people call the Great Generation, the people that came from the 20s and the 30s, mm-hmm. They won 2 world wars, then they went on to build the most powerful economic machine and military machine in the history of mankind. How did all of that happen? Today we're living in a generation where it seems like so many people, especially if they're under 30 years of age,
right.
They don't really even know how we became a great nation. They don't know what causes made that happen. They don't know what the values were or the aspirations of the great generation. And so I really felt the timing was now, in this political season, heading towards an election year, where we're hearing statistics that more than 50% of young people, 30 years and younger, prefer socialism mm-hmm. over capitalism. It's an entitlement generation, right? And some of the politicians that are out there really play off that. We're going to promise you free health care, free this, free education, free everything, right? And too many young people don't really even understand what the ramifications behind all that are. What is socialism? What is Marxism? Why was capitalism so successful in the United States? What is democracy? And so I just thought the timing was right to reevaluate and to restate, you know, what were the great values of the generation that made America the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. If we believe that somebody like Donald Trump is keying off of something in our country where people feel like something is missing, what's really behind that? Mm-hmm. And how would you make America great again? Beyond political diatribe, what would you actually do to make that happen again? So I really felt the timing of this was very important.
It's difficult to get back what you've forgotten you once had. And as Santayana once said, and I'm paraphrasing, those who forget the lessons of history are condemned to repeat them. Mm-hmm. We're repeating the lessons of the Roman Empire, in which they voted themselves entitlements to the point that it collapsed under its own weight. Mm-hmm. When you selected the chapters and assigned these out to the various authors, what message did you want to convey when this was all put together?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I'm really speaking from my own life experiences. The best things about me, if there are any good things, right? The best things about me, besides what Jesus did by miracle of rebirth, really came from my grandparents, who were survivors of the Great Depression. They were survivors, you know, of the Dust Bowl. They came out of Oklahoma. My last birthday, my oldest daughter, Althea, she surprised me in that she went and found an old Phoenix Gazette article from 1937 talking about the Dust Bowl people, the new age of pioneers that were trekking out of Oklahoma towards the promised land, California, and it was all a feature about my grandparents. And she went and found that again. It had burned up in my house in 2011, but she found it again. In fact, it's here. It's too small for you to even be able to make out, but I brought it with me so I wouldn't forget to talk about it. But my values came out of that. Being able to sit in my grandparents' home and hear how just through rugged individualism, because this was long before, the welfare age and free food and there was no free nothing. You could starve to death, right? These people were sleeping under a tree, and yet Grandpa went on with his third grade education to succeed, to help found the city of El Mirage, Arizona, to build a business there, to do so well that he was able to take care of other people who didn't have. How did he do that? Well, it was all those values. And here I am as a young man, then later as a young preacher, sitting under a tree by the wood pile in the backyard while Grandpa whittled on a stick, and I'd ask my 90-year-old grandpa things about God, about life, about philosophy. And my worldview was shaped by all of that. Now today, it really hurts me when I see what's happening with our country, when I see how freely a generation would give up what was earned through blood, sweat, war, battlefields, when people knew why they were fighting for something and what they were fighting to preserve. It really concerns me, so I was just really motivated about this. And then, of course, my mother just passed away, and she was the last of the McLaughlin side of my family, that survived the Great Depression. And so this was just really on my heart, so I reached out to a bunch of people and said, let's recapture what were the values when once we were a nation, each chapter in there, when once we were a nation of faith, when once we were a nation of strength, when once we were a nation of capitalism. Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, by the way, wrote the chapter on strength. Chris Putnam wrote a chapter when once we were a nation of industry, which is a huge part of our American history.
The change seems to have been from a culture in which we understood that we only gained by taking risk, but also being aware that when we risked, there was a chance we would fail without expecting the government to step in and protect us from ourselves. How has that attitude changed over the years, and how much responsibility do we, as Christians in America, bear for creating this bubble wrap generation, this generation that is growing up isolated and protected from the consequences of their actions?
Well, I think we do bear responsibility because it's the way we use our pulpits. It's the message that we talk about. And if people are told by the current Pope, for instance, and by most of the presidential and other politicians that are running for elected office, if you vote for me, you're going to get this free and that free and something else free. Yeah, it kind of always reminds me of Margaret Thatcher and her famous line, socialism is a great ideal until you run out of other people's money to give away. What people don't understand is that socialism is actually a system that could lead to the coming of Antichrist. Because it makes you a ward of the state. Everybody works for the state. Everybody works for, Big Brother. And you get your little modicum of income and your little tiny house to live in. And if you outwork the guy next to you, it's not going to matter because you all get the same portion. Right. But hey, it's free. All you got to do is work every day for the government, right? Or what capitalism did, and you wrote the chapter on capitalism in this book. What it did was say you could be Tom Horn, his grandfather. You could drop out of school in the third grade, but if you worked really hard and you saved your money and you put money aside, you could grow your estate. You could do better. Someday you could even become the president of the United States of America. That was the American dream, right? And it really did build the greatest, most powerful country on the face of the earth. And everybody around the world was working to get here, migrating here because of that dream. And so we've lost a lot, but can we get it back? That's the message of the book. It's not just to stand up and say, woe is us, we're really in the, in the bathroom now. It's to say we can do it again. If a bunch of agrarians, if a bunch of farmers and a bunch of people that migrated here from Great Britain could come here with strong faith in God and hard work and labor and believe that they could Yeah, I love this picture, by the way. You wrote the chapter on industry. Remember that famous old picture with the woman flexing her muscles?
Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah. Rosie the Riveter. I mean, that came out of the Industrial Revolution. While men and sons were fighting in war, Rosie the Riveter, they opened up the factories and they built the most powerful and most industrial war-building machine in the history of humanity.
It is remarkable, and it does seem to be a fundamental change. And part of it is what we've passed on to our children. Part of it, too, is, at the risk of being politically incorrect, the changing composition of the population in the United States. The question then is how do we transmit those values? Before we go to break, though, we do need to make an official welcome to Chris Putnam, the new member of the Skywatch TV team. Of course, Chris Putnam is the author of a book that we have recommended for your reference library many times, The Supernatural Worldview, and of course the co-author sitting here of the new book, The Final Roman Emperor, the Islamic Antichrist, and the Vatican's Last Crusade. But Chris, it was a strange journey getting you here, but we're glad that you're here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here, and that the journey's over. I don't think I'll be renting a 24-foot truck towing a car anytime soon. But it's great to be here, and this was the last chapter I probably worked on at my own home before I came here, and boy, it was right in at the wire, but I got it done. And I learned a lot in writing this, and kind of like Tom, I kind of used my own personal experience as a way to write the chapter, because I was born in 1965, actually on this day. During my lifetime, I've watched this massive shift happen. And, when I was born, most things were made in the United States. Our TV was made in the United States. My bicycle was, probably got it from Sears. It was probably made here. And everything was that way. And that's the way. I had a G.I. Joe, and I use this in the book as an example. My G.I. Joe, his enemy was a German. All right? Yeah. That's the way it was in the 60s. And so I had a German stormtrooper and an American G.I. Joe, and we still had a real conscious memory of World War II.
Well, and as a kid of half German descent, my mother's side emigrated from what is now Russia, but they were Germans, emigrated in the 1890s. But I still caught flack in the 60s and 70s as being a kid with partly German. So,
right. And, I was just shocked at the way this has all been forgotten. And, one of the things I talk about in the book also, Ray Comfort, the evangelist, did a video on abortion called 180. And he started that out by going out and showing like 20-somethings a picture of Adolf Hitler. Do you know who this is? They were clueless. And I was shocked by that personally, mainly because of that quote that you started out with, and I cited that in the book as well. Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Now, we're talking about perhaps the Antichrist is going to arrive on the scene soon. Theologians and many Bible scholars have for many years kind of used Adolf Hitler as a type of the future Antichrist, right? Now, if they don't even know who he is, how are they going to recognize this guy, right? Troubling.
So as I said at the beginning, I've reached the age in my life where I'm saying things that I heard my dad say, and he definitely would be saying, this is not the country I grew up in. When once we were a nation, 12 chapters, 12 different topics, but also exploring how we might get back what we once had. Of course, whenever you order from Skywatch TV, we like to add more than just the book. We'll tell you how to get a copy of the book, and the program continues as Skywatch TV continues right after this. America isn't the same country that we grew up in, but it's hard to get back what we've forgotten we had. That's why Defender Publishing presents When Once We Were a Nation. 12 chapters, 12 authors, each one remembering when once we were a nation of strength, of rugged individualism, of dreams and opportunity, when once we were a nation of faith. From authors like Tom Horn, Chris Putnam, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Sheila Zielinski, and more. And when you order a copy of the new book, When Once We Were a Nation from Skywatch TV, we'll add these books free. Dancing with the Devil, an honest look at the occult. Culture Clash, Islam's War with America. Conspiracies and the Cross, how to refute the most popular attacks on the gospel. And God Bless America by Todd Starnes of Fox News. A $95 value for only $19.95 plus shipping. When Once We Were a Nation from Defender Publishing, because the first step to getting it back is remembering what we had. Welcome back to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. Please log on to the website at skywatchtv.com because we've got some stuff there that is exclusive to viewers at the website, and also the Skywatch TV channels on Roku, YouTube, and now Vimeo as well. special programs. We introduced you to Chris Putnam in the first segment. He's hosting a new weekly program called The Supernatural Worldview. Again, available only as a web exclusive. Weekly looks at science, into the multiverse with Josh Peck, Sci Friday with my best friend and our science editor, Sharon Gilbert, and web exclusive interviews that we couldn't fit into the network television schedule. You'll find all of those linked at skywatchtv.com. We're discussing the book When Once We Were a Nation, 12 chapters, 12 topics about where America has come from and what we might do to get those things back. And joining us in studio now, two more of the authors of the book When Once We Were a Nation, Allie Anderson and
Hello.
my best friend, Sharon Gilbert.
Hi, honey. I used to be Chris Putnam, and I turned into me.
And playing the role of Tom Horn now is Allie Anderson. So just like in the soap operas where there's just, anyway. The title of your chapter, Allie, is intriguing because it seems to me that one of the things that we used to get in America was this idea that as a young person, you would learn from your elders. And so the title of your chapter, When Once We Were a Nation of Mentors, how did you approach that topic?
Well, the sad thing is that our youth today are honestly being cheated of the mentorship that they should be given. It has to do with economy. It has to do with both parents working. It has to do with the fact that our current society has a family structure that is more under attack than the history of this country has ever seen. So the divorce rate is high, parents are splitting, you have single parent families, and single parents have a huge lot. It's a huge role to fill for them to try to fill both roles, try to remain nurturing, try to make an income, try to make it to school conferences, and still have money for shoes. And I mean, there's just a lot of challenges on the single parents.
Yes, and it's interesting how these chapters, when you begin to look at the subjects that are covered, how many of them overlap. But my subject was on capitalism, but it was more on economics in general. And since World War II, many women have entered the workforce, and especially since the 1970s, as the average wage has declined actually for people in even families that are still the nuclear family, when you've got mother, father, and children, both parents have to work in order to earn a living wage. We were blessed after Sharon and I married. Sharon was able to stay home and be the primary caregiver for our daughter. In our parents' generation, my mother was able to stay home until my sister and I were in high school. But you're right, that is something that is being driven by economics, but also by the message we're getting from an increasingly anti-Christian culture.
It's a problem that perpetuates itself. So as children grow up without all the mentorship that they need, they find themselves running amok, maybe being teen parents, or maybe not teen parents, but as they have children, if they are single parents or not, if they were missing that when they were a child, they don't even know, if they're aware that there's a problem, they're not sure what the problem is oftentimes.
They have no
so they're
role
not sure
model.
what correction to even put into place. And a lot of parents will say, I want my kid to have what I never had, but that doesn't mean that they fully understand what they didn't have, because it's a problem that has been escalating. It's just that now it's escalating so quickly that you have a lot of kids out there,
who are
even the
having
parents,
kids.
and even the parents of this current generation. A lot of these things started changing between the 50s and the 80s. So a lot of what has happened in between that period of time has affected the parents of this current generation. So this problem has already started to perpetuate,
Well, and it's also
snowballing.
Yeah, and it's also happened with the dissolution of the nuclear or the extended family. Most of my cousins, I grew up in Chicago, but most of my cousins moved to California before I was even born. So I didn't see them very often, didn't have that extended family around to have guidance even from older cousins or uncles that I saw very regularly. Yeah, and as you say, this is a problem that perpetuates, because then as children are coming up without that guidance and those role models, then they don't have anything to pattern their own behavior after.
Yeah, and the family is more fragmented, and that's part of the economic issue as well, because parents are having to relocate to find opportunity for employment, for schooling, to get a better paying job. So it isolates the children even more.
And sadly, the only options would appear to be just sacrificing finance in order to spend more time with children.
But
And
if you're a
that's-
single parent,
How do you do
that's
that?
not an option
It's
a
not
lot
an
of times.
option.
It's just a
Right.
really difficult problem, and it doesn't have an easy solution, unfortunately.
Touching on the subject of science, which of course is your background and your education, your chapter, When Once We Were a Nation of Creationists.
Yeah, well, things have changed a lot in the last couple of hundred years. Beginning in around the early 19th century, science started moving toward what we call evolutionism, the belief that we descend from lower species, which makes no sense if you believe in true science, because that's flies in the face of entropy. But beginning in around 1810 or so, this idea of taxonomy, where you take the individual species and you actually organize them into a long taxonomical chart, so that they started looking at this and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is sort of like this, and this is sort of like this. Maybe they actually are all part of the same process. And so the idea of evolution is really a lot older than Charles Darwin. His book was published in 1870, but it goes back to the early 19th century and before. I mean, it's an old idea. It's an old spiritual idea,
Well, when
too.
you go back in history, you see that the ancient Greeks, pre-Christ, were
Yes.
investigating this as a possible
Yes.
explanation for how we came to be where we are.
Exactly. In our country, most of the founders of our country, the one who wrote the original laws and helped to fashion the Constitution, really weren't Christians as you and I would define it. They were deists. And I believe at the time that the people living in the United States, much like most of the people living in the United States today, who call themselves Christians, truly do believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior. The problem is when you have leadership who use similar terms but actually believe a different system. Deism sets itself up to replace the Creator that you and I would call God Almighty with the great architect. Anybody you wanted to call, the divine watchmaker who just sets the world going and in motion, then goes off and creates another world. That idea sets itself up for not only evolution, but self-directed evolution, and then eventually transhumanism.
The transhumanist movement. It also has an impact, I think, on your topic, Allie, regarding the family and the impact on the family. When kids are coming up with the idea that we're just a biological accident of history, it affects the way they relate to others around them. And there are other ideas that are coming in from science now that are speculative, really science fiction. The idea that there may be parallel universes out there, that we're just living in a holographic projection. Nothing is real.
Well, there was a time when the idea of having a mentor was important because there were standards, and you needed to learn the standards. But we have moved away from a nation of standards to a nation of do what is right in your own eyes.
Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's a really good point, because standards imply that there is someone to create an objective set of standards. And there is only one objective creator to whom we can turn. And when you take him out of the equation, then anything goes. So this is more than just a matter of science. The issue of creation, the big question where we came from, really has a whole impact on our entire worldview.
Yes, it's the issue of Genesis. If you do not believe in Genesis, you may as well just throw out the rest of the Bible. Because that is where it all began. And if you don't have that understanding that he created us, we are special, we are unique in this world. And because kids aren't getting mentoring, they're not getting it at home, but they may not be going to church to get it there. Where are they going to get it? I mean, when you wrote your chapter, you're a mom. Where do kids go now?
Well, if they're not guided to go somewhere, then they find it. There's stuff out there. And if they're looking for answers, and
The
kids
internet.
are curious, teenagers are curious.
Yeah.
They're gonna keep looking until they find an answer. And unfortunately, there's somebody out there ready to answer those questions for them. And if we're not there to answer those questions for them, someone's going to be more than happy to stand up and take that role and fill their head with whatever their agenda is. And that's where the danger really comes in.
Absolutely. That relates to the recent conversation that we had with Opal Singleton of
Singleton, yes.
millionkids.org about the predators who are doing exactly that. They are giving kids what they crave, which is reinforcement. They are grooming them, telling them how special they are. I heard a very wise preacher once who said, as he addressed the men in the congregation, sorry, I get this way whenever I think
know.
about our daughter. He said, men, fathers, make sure you are telling your little girl how special she is and how pretty she is, so that the first person who comes along and tells her that doesn't take her away from you, because there are plenty out there under the influence of the enemy who will be more than happy to do it. And I just thought, boy, that really stuck with me, because you're right. There are kids out there looking for that kind of mentoring that our culture is making very difficult.
And some of the most important mentors in a family, I would say, in a given family, is that male image. It doesn't have to be the dad. It can be the grandpa. It can be an uncle. But you need to have some sort of influential male in every household, not just for the girls, not just for the boys, but everyone. I mean, the wife is benefiting, the man benefits, but all the parents benefit, and the grandkids who come along after that. But you know, you're an awesome dad. But sadly, there are an awful lot of parents, an awful lot of families. Kids are growing up with zero male influence, no male mentor, and that's tragic.
Well, and one of the scary things that I found out when I was reading some of these statistics is that more so even than the female role model in the home, the male role model in the home is where the children define the parameters for what they consider acceptable in a future relationship, what they consider normal, and even the kind of behavior that they consider to be loving. And that's where this sense of love comes in, where people can misinterpret the wrong things for love if that parameter isn't set in the right direction when they're very young.
It makes them that more easily groomed.
Yeah, it's not politically correct, but it's true. Without a firm foundation in who created us and what his standards were, and then those standards passed down from generation to generation, that is in large part responsible for where we find the country today. And one of the reasons that Tom Horn basically commissioned the authors behind the book, When Once We Were a Nation. Allie Anderson, Sharon Gilbert, wonderful conversation, all too short. We thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.